Hey now Brawlers, Nick Minahan here, and today we're going to take a look at a game that comes in a very familiar box, and that's Street Fighter, the deck building game. Why do I say it's a familiar box? Because this is the box that every one of Cryptozoic's Cerberus engine deck builders comes in. What is a Cerberus engine, you may ask? Well, first off, I still don't know why it has the name Cerberus, but it's the deck building system that Cryptozoic Entertainment uses for each of the different licensed deck builders that they have. So originally it was the DC Comics deck builder and its sequel, Heroes United. And then there's the Lord of the Rings deck builder, which I think at this point they have one for each of the 3 movies, and it uses the movie art, so it's clearly based directly off of the movies, the movie stills, I should say. And now you have the Street Fighter deck building game, and pretty soon they're going to have the Naruto, the anime deck building game as well. And so they all use these same systems, but each one sort of puts a different spin on it in some way, shape, or form. So of course the spin of Street Fighter is that, unlike in DC Comics deck builder where each player is a superhero who's battling each other for some unknown reason, no one can figure it out why they're in the competition using villains' powers against one another, Street Fighter's theme is much more straightforward. You're trying to beat the crap out of each other. And you're doing that by, of course, acquiring cards in deck building fashion that represent all the different moves from the different iterations of Street Fighter over the years. And each of your characters is also one of either the original Street Fighters or some of the newer ones that have come out in the later sequels. And there's a few little twists in there that are unlike the previous Cerberus engine deck builders. For instance, the idea of counterattacking your opponent and going through different stages of the Street Fighter universe. Is it enough to change anyone's mind who didn't like any of the previous Cerberus engine games? Is there enough meat here? Is it good for Street Fighter fans? Let's go ahead and do a brief overview of the game, then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Okay, I want to run through this overview of Street Fighter the deck building game pretty quickly because I imagine that most people that are watching this are familiar with either the DC Comics deck building game or the Lord of the Rings deck building game, both from Cryptozoic. And all of these games use the Cerberus engine created by Cryptozoic, which is a deck building engine using many of the same themes, mechanics, setup, layout. Each one of them just has a few things that are different than the others, so I'm going to primarily focus on that. But for those of you that might be new and that don't, or are just here because you like Street Fighter a lot, you're not really familiar with these games. A deck building game is a game where each player starts with the same hand of very limited cards. In this game, as with many of the other Cerberus engine games, you are going to start with these punch cards, which are just very generic. They're not worth victory points, which would be the star in the corner, and they cost nothing because you start with them. And they only give you +1 power. Power is a currency in this game, which you're going to use to buy cards and also to defeat bosses. And they only give you +1 power, which isn't bad, but there are better things ahead of you. So you start off with 7 of those, but you also start off with 3 vulnerabilities, which are nothing. They are junk. They don't even give you power. All they do is take up space in your deck. In a deck building game, efficiency is key. You want to draw your really powerful cards as quickly as possible, and you only get to draw 5 cards per turn at the end of your turn in this game. Therefore, if you're drawing vulnerabilities, you are setting yourself back. So you want to get rid of these by destroying them as quickly as possible. When you destroy a card in this game, you don't just discard it, you remove it entirely from the game. And that's a good thing in the case of vulnerabilities and even punches eventually. Now, once you get your starting deck, you're also going to get your starting hero. Every character here, this is kind of weird thing, terminology here. This entire stack is called the hero stack. Some of them are red, and you would probably think of them as villains. And in fact, the corresponding cards that you'll find in the main deck for, say, Vega and Balrog, these are all the Street Fighters you know and either love or hate, or Bison. Their cards in the deck that corresponds to them are actually called villain cards, but for this case, these are all called superheroes. And you're going to shuffle these up or just let people choose whichever one they want. And they all are based on the traditional Street Fighters. I don't think they have a lot of crazy ones from some of the later sequels, but it's most of the main heroes and maybe from 1 or 2, like maybe Super Street Fighter. To be honest, I've been out of Street Fighter for quite a while, so some of these I don't even recognize. But they all have the same thing in common. Oh, let me also point out that Blanka is a promo fighter. You may or may not get him with your copy of the game. I did. I'm not even sure why, but it was just taped to my game. But if you don't have him, that's because he's supposed to be a promo, together with his Ultra card, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, the one thing that all of these heroes have in common is they all have a counterattack, although that counterattack and what it actually does is different for everyone. And this is different than the other Cerberus engine games. So if you're only here to figure out what the new stuff is in Street Fighter, this is the main thing. When when you have a counterattack, this doesn't happen to you. It happens to your opponent. If they play a card that says attack on it, so for instance, out here in the main lineup, I have the card Gil. Gil has, sorry, it's kind of hard to see, but it says attack with bold letters. That foe puts a weakness on top of his deck when you choose a foe. So if you're subject to an attack like that, and you have your corresponding Ultra card already in your deck and in your hand, your opponent's going to be subject to this counterattack, which in Cammy's case is put a defense card from your discard pile or in play under your superhero. A card that's under your superhero is not in your deck, not available to you, although you may be able to purchase it later. It's like your own version of the starting lineup. For those who are not familiar with the Cerberus engine, I'll circle back around to what a lot of this stuff means. Akuma, on the other hand, his counterattack says, put a card in your discard pile or in play with cost 4 or greater other than a location under your superhero. Let's look at another one. Chun-Li. Put a weakness or starter card from any foe's discard pile on top of your deck. So that's nasty. Remember that this is happening to the person that you're counterattacking if you're Chun-Li, which means they have to take a really bad card from someone else and put it on top of their deck, which means they're going to draw it right away, which is really bad, and they're stuck with it in their deck. So those are just some examples. Now, what about those Ultra cards? This is the other new thing in the game that ties together directly with the counterattack. Once everybody gets their hero, whether randomly or by choice, they're also going to take the corresponding Ultra card. There's one for each of the heroes in the game, and when you get your Ultra card, you're going to shove it underneath your superhero card. So you do not have access to it right away. You need to gain access to it later. Like I said, any card, including your Ultra that's underneath your superhero card, can be purchased later on at any time using power on your turn that you accumulate by whatever means, as if it was your own starting lineup, but it's not treated as part of the starting lineup, so it's not subject to any kind of effects that destroy cards in the lineup. But remember, they're not part of your deck, which means that if they're still stuck there at the end of the game, which is going to happen when you either go through all the stages or when you run out of cards to fill up the slots in the main deck, if you don't have those cards in your deck, you don't get the points for them, so that's very important. But you do want to get your Ultra eventually, because these have 3 different things. It's very versatile. First off, you could just play it on your turn to get a special effect, like in this case, Yoga Catastrophe. I think any kind of Yoga is a catastrophe, personally, but anyways. Dhalsim says, +2 power and put a weakness on top of a foe's deck, so that's cool. But then you can also use the attack, which is each foe puts a weakness on top of his deck. But you could also choose to use this as a defense. Anytime you have a defense card in the Cerberus engine deck and someone's attacking you, you can, on their turn, you get to discard a defense card or do whatever it tells you to do with the defense card to avoid it. In this case, for all of the Ultras, you get to shuffle the Ultra back into your deck to avoid the attack, then draw a card, and then your opponent is subject to your counterattack, which is super cool. They all do the same thing. All the other little bits, like the power and the attack, or what you get is different. So, for instance, Blanca says +2 power. Each foe gains a weakness and then discards all starter cards from their hands. Akuma says +2 power. Each foe discards a random card. For each foe who discards a card with cost 6 or greater, you draw a card. Actually, I guess these are all +2 power, so that's the same. But the attack is different, and the defense is the same, though. And they are all worth 2 points, which is important to note as well. So that's the main new thing to this game, is the Ultras and the counterattacks. It adds a lot more competitiveness, a lot more in-your-face action, which, makes sense for a game based on Street Fighter. The other new thing, although it mostly functions just like the other Cerberus engine games, is the stages. And, each game in this line of games has like a supervillain or something that you have to fight through. In this case, what you're actually trying to get are these stages, which are just cards or location cards like a lot of the other Cryptozoic deck builders. So if you were able, let's say you start off and they're all in order. So USA is always first, Thailand is last. USA has a cost of 7 down here. Now, this is a card that if you successfully defeat the stage and the stage boss, you get to put this into your deck. So USA says location. When you play the card, you leave it in front of you. Ongoing, once during each of your turns, put the top card of the main deck under your superhero. And that's good because you're getting a card that only you may have the potential to buy later. And it's worth 5 points. The cost of the card and the number of points escalates as you go further down through the deck. Now, it's not that easy, though, to just buy this card like the other cards in the lineup, which each have a cost. Instead, once you decide you're going to fight that stage, you have to take the deck of superheroes that are not being played in the game, shuffle them up, and then draw the top one. And now, all of a sudden, you're fighting Blanca. Which means that you are subject to his counterattack. If you have a defense card, great. If not, you're subject to his attack. Regardless of what happens, though, you still get the stage card as long as you had the currency available. You just might get kind of jacked up for having done it. and the game will end once the last card is taken from here. But you also have the starting lineup, and this is where we get back to people that are not familiar with these games. At the beginning of the game, you have this main deck of cards, which consists of villains, equipment, superpower cards, which are the orange cards. Heroes, I don't think there's any other location cards, but those are mostly what's in there. You'll shuffle those up, put 5 out. On your turn, you can buy any of the cards that you can afford out here in the lineup. At the end of the turn, they get replaced. That's a very important distinction because when we used to play DC Comics, we got that rule wrong for a lot of the time. But in any case, you will buy as many as you can afford. At the end of your turn, refill them up. It goes on to the next person. That person has the option of buying from the cards out here. Remember, you want to buy these better cards, put them into your deck. Anytime you buy a card in deck building games, it goes into your discard pile, and whenever you have to draw more cards and you have no deck left, you reshuffle your discard pile into a deck, which means you're going to eventually gain access to these better cards. Let's look at some examples. I already showed you Gil, who's really weird looking. Let's look at Akuma's Gi, which is equipment, +2 power, and at the end of the game, it's worth a victory point for each different attack card in your deck. Sonic Boom, superpower. You may destroy a card in your hand or discard a pile if you choose not to, +2 power. So remember, destroying cards can be really, really powerful, but even if you don't do it, at least you get +2 power. Gohakodoken, superpower. You may destroy a card in your hand or discard pile and then draw a card. I picked a lot of, by random chance, there's a lot of cards out here to destroy things. Ken Masters lets you destroy a card in your hand or discard pile for each other hero you played this turn. He sucks. Anyways. Let's see. Random chance. There we go. There's Blanca. Jungle Warrior, +2 power. At the end of the game, this card is worth 5 victory points if you have 5 or more different superpowers in your deck. I could go on and on. There's a ton of different cards in that deck, tons of different types of things that all do different stuff. Couple last things I'll mention. First off, like in other Cerberus Engine games, you can always buy kicks. And lastly, as in other Cerberus Engine games, you have weaknesses, but they're a little bit different this time because in this games, you're going to get a lot of weaknesses, and consequently, they added the extra rule for the Street Fighter deck builder that when you have a weakness in your hand on your turn, you can play it, quote unquote, and all that happens is that you get to throw it back in the stack. So it's actually really easy to get rid of weaknesses, but you get so many of them that it's very likely that you will probably get stuck with a few in your deck anyways, and they're worth -1 point at the end of the game. Sorry about that. I know it's not a really comprehensive review, but for people that are here having played the other Cerberus Engine games, hopefully you can see some of the different stuff that's here. If you like Street Fighter a lot and you've never played a deck builder before, hopefully you get a gist of how this game would play as opposed to other traditional card games and board games. That's Street Fighter, the deck building game from Cryptozoic. Let's go to my final thoughts. Well, first and foremost, I'll just say this. 90% of this game is exactly the same as any of the other Cerberus Engine Cryptozoic deck builders. You sit down and play this, it's going to feel exactly like you're playing one of the DC Comics games. It'll feel exactly like you're playing one of the Lord of the Rings games. And I will say I've never actually played the Lord of the Rings deck builders, but I've seen overviews. It plays essentially the same. And hence, you can mix and match all of them. That's the reason. And so, this isn't going to change anyone's mind. Like I said in the intro, is this going to change anyone's mind who didn't like the previous ones? No. If it was the mechanics that you didn't like about the previous iterations of this game engine, this will definitely not change your mind because there is not enough new stuff here to make it a drastically different game. It's just the case. Now, if you do like the previous iterations like I do, if you like the DC Comics or you like the Lord of the Rings, and you like the theme of Street Fighter, then I think this is worthy of a purchase. And I say that that's important because it is, not that the Street Fighter's got a lot of popularity even today, but nevertheless, if you don't like the theme, then there's really no reason to not pick up another Cerberus Engine game that you think has a better theme for you. That's just the way that it is. But if you like all the different themes, let's say that you have the DC Comics game, one of them at least, one of the Lord of the Rings games, and you're like, do I need another Cerberus Engine deck building game? Well, that depends on just how much you like this system and whether or not you even are the type of person that mixes and matches the different cards. I think this is a fine game in and of itself, and I do like the different little bits that they add. The Ultra cards and the counterattack cards mixed together with the stage boss idea. It's not much. That's why I said this isn't radically different than the other games, but it does add an interesting little quirk. For instance, the weaknesses in this game, your deck is going to be flooded with them all the time because people are constantly attacking you. This is much more in-your-face competitive than the other games. Even DC Comics, of course, that introduced the idea of attacking and the weaknesses and defense cards and things like that. But it never felt that brutal. Usually the defense cards were for the supervillains that you were going to fight. And it's the same way here. You go through the stage bosses who counterattack you, and you want to try to have defense cards. But in this, every turn you could potentially be getting attacked. Of course, they make the weaknesses not as bad, because as soon as you can play, quote-unquote, a weakness, you can just throw it right back on top of the stack. But nevertheless, if you're constantly being attacked, if people realize that you're probably ahead in the game in points, that they've noticed you've taken a lot of stages, then they're going to be slamming you with weaknesses as much as possible. And you can only get rid of so many. So eventually, if the game ends too quick, you're going to be stuck with a lot of negative points in your deck. But that's where the Ultra defenses come in. The Ultra card, which is really cool about that, is it can be used in 3 different ways. You can just play it like a normal card if you draw it, you don't have anything better to do on your turn. Or you can play it as an attack card, or you can play it as a defense card. So that's some really cool versatility. And because it gets shuffled back in, if you use it as a defense card right back into your deck, it's very possible that you're going to be drawing it again very soon. So your opponents, once you've bought your Ultra card, your opponents need to be very careful about attacking you from that point forward. And that's another interesting aspect of this game too, the fact that cards can get shoved underneath your superhero card. Well, Street Fighter superhero card. It's just it's weird terminology they use because they need to make sure that the systems can be mixed together, the different types of games, superhero, supervillain, whatever. But the fact that those cards can be, cards you can buy can be shoved underneath your card and then purchased at a later date as if they were in the lineup, I really like that idea. It's like having your own personal buy pile. It's what I like about High Command, and of course it's not as prevalent in this game as in High Command's War Machine and Horde's High Command, but it's still a neat little thing. And the fact that you start off with your Ultra card there, and you have to decide, boy, I've got 6 power this turn. Should I go ahead for that awesome card in the lineup, or should I buy my Ultra, which is really better than most other cards that cost 6 or even 7 in the deck, but it's not going anywhere. I could buy it whenever I want. I don't think there's any effect I've seen in the game that can remove a card from underneath your superhero without your permission. So it's an interesting dynamic that I like. Again, it's not anything drastic. It doesn't change the core of the game that much, but I like it. And for this, I would think that people who have the tendency to like fighting games would be inclined to like competitive card games like this because they can be very fast and frenetic. Although, I will say the couple of times that I played this, it seemed to go slower than the other deck builders in the Cryptozoic line that I played. I'm not sure why. Maybe because everybody wanted to get the really cool looking cards that came out in the lineup. It seems like there's more cool cards, more combo-rific cards in this set than other Cryptozoic games. And therefore, we were kind of ignoring the stages. So we actually ended, one of the games we played actually ended from going through the main deck, which I've never seen happen in the other Cryptozoic deck builder. So that could be something to consider, but I'm sorry, I got derailed. What I was saying was that if you are someone who really loves Street Fighter, or if you know someone who really loves Street Fighter and you're trying to get them into deck building games, I think those kind of people are pre-inclined. If they're going to play a card game at all, deck building would be the way to go, and this is definitely in that person's ballpark. It's still lightweight, despite the extra little features, but it just, even if it goes a little long, it feels fast while you're playing it, and it's got tons of cool artwork. It's cool to buy, especially like I played Sagat in one of our games, and I got a lot of the Sagat cards, Bob Saget, of course, and it was cool to get the different combos going off. I'm not going to say I felt like a Street Fighter, but I did think that the theme was more integrally tied to this game than it was in the other Cryptozoic deck builders that I played. So something to consider for sure if you really had problems with the theme in the other games, but you like Street Fighter and like the idea of being more in your face, like you're actually fighting the other players, definitely keep your eyes on this one. I like it. I think it's got a lot of good cards. I think you could easily mix it in with the other sets if you really want to. And I love the counterattack mechanic where you're never sure if you should really attack your opponent or not because they might ultra you. It's a really cool concept, and I make no apologies for the fact that I like the Cerberus engine. I don't care what other people say. I think they're all pretty fun in their own regard. I do want to check out the Lord of the Rings ones at some point, but for now I'm perfectly happy with the DC Comics games, both of them, and Street Fighter. I would recommend this one for anyone that likes deck building and anyone that likes the Street Fighter theme. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day in every way. Take care.